years, I've seen firsthand the incredible spike, explosion before COVID-19 of anxiety. And so I've also seen there's a real disconnect between what people think the Bible actually teaches on anxiety. So you have this exploding need. And I think one of the reasons it's exploding is there's so much change. There's so many distractions. We're so connected, and yet we don't have a lot of, deep, meaningful relationships. One study found that the world, and this study was done in 2010. So think about this. The world in the last 30 years has changed as much as the previous 300 combined.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And that was before iPads, Alexa, Uber Eats, Netflix. I mean, that was 2010. So think about even the last 10 years, how much the world has changed.
Yeah.
And change can be stressful. And we've all grown up in a world where, unlike, in our grandparents' age, they'd hear about Pearl Harbor 2 weeks after on a news or on the paper. Now, if a terrorist attacks, in Belgium, I hear about it from, an app on my phone immediately.
Yep.
And social media has only contributed to this. The studies on mental health and the way that it both drives comparison, can drive depression, and people are experiencing tremendous anxiety. And so you have this explosion. And then, like I said, there is not a real understanding about what the Bible teaches. I think the average person thinks God just says, don't worry, stop being anxious, which fails to really communicate some rich principles he's given. Like one of my favorite, and I feel like I'm just going off here.
You're good, man. Bring it.
About it. One of the things that for example, to use one example of how people just don't understand what the Bible communicates is they will say, I don't know if I'm stable, if I cut out, let me know. Hey, when Paul says in Philippians chapter 4, 6 and 7, very well-known verse for especially Christians, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, let your requests with thanksgiving be known to God, and the peace of God, which transcends understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. The Greek word anxious, when he says don't be anxious, it's the Greek word merimnao. It's a word that's synonymous with meditation. In other words, scholars would link it to meditating. So when Paul says don't be anxious, he's not saying don't have an anxious thought. That's impossible. Right. That's like, if somebody says don't think about a pink elephant, you immediately think about a pink elephant,
Yeah.
Paul, it's impossible. Those thoughts are going to come in. You can choose not to meditate on them. You can say, you know what? I'm going to have those anxious thoughts, but I'm going to replace them and choose to meditate on what is true. Or I'm not going to start my day. In other words, no one would disagree with what Paul is saying. In my opinion, I've never heard anybody say, you know what changed my life for the better? I began waking up every morning and meditating on everything fearful, anxious, potentially that could go wrong that day. And I just ran through it in my mind, this could happen and I could get hit by a meteor and, my mom could die and I could lose my job. And no one would say that's helpful, right?
Final Destination, all the ways you can die. Is that crazy show?
Yeah, yes. Like no one would say that makes your life meaningfully better. And that's what Paul is saying. And it's that because immediately after those verses, he goes into whatever is true, whatever is noble. In other words, don't meditate on that stuff. Meditate on what is pure, lovely, anything that is true. Right. And so that's just one of so many examples that in my experience in talking with people, the reason the Bible is not seen as a first line of defense for a lot of Christians is they don't know what it actually teaches. They assume